A whale rolls forward at the surface, arches its back, lifts its tail into the air, and slides down into the dark. And then it is gone. Not for a few seconds, not for a minute, for tens of minutes, and in the case of the true champions of the deep, for well over an hour, at depths where the light has completely disappeared and the pressure would crush almost anything we have ever built. The explanation almost everyone reaches for is the obvious one. It must have enormous lungs. It must fill them completely at the surface and simply carry a gigantic tank of air down with it. That explanation is wrong, and it is wrong in an interesting way. Relative to body size, a whale's lungs are not especially large. Ours are actually rather generous by comparison. And here's the detail that really breaks the picture. Many deep-diving whales do not go down with full lungs at all. Several of them exhale before they descend. They deliberately get rid of air before diving. So where is the oxygen? The answer is that it is not stored in hair at all. It is stored inside the body itself, chemically bound into the tissues, and the single largest reserve is not in the chest, but in the muscles. A diving whale is not carrying a tank. It is carrying a fuel load soaked into its own flesh. In the next few minutes, we will go through all four parts of the system. The blood, which is far richer than yours. The muscles, which are the real reservoir, and which are a startling color because of it. The shutdown routine the body runs during a dive. And finally, what actually happens to those lungs at depth, which is the most counterintuitive part of the whole story. Dear viewers, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel with the bell. And now, let us continue. Start with the blood, because it is the part closest to what you already know. Oxygen does not simply dissolve in blood in useful quantities. It has to be carried, and the carrier is hemoglobin, a protein packed inside red blood cells. Each hemoglobin molecule grabs oxygen at the lungs and releases it in the tissues that need it. So the oxygen capacity of blood comes down to a simple question. How much hemoglobin is in it? In diving whales, the answer is a great deal. Their blood carries a substantially higher concentration of hemoglobin than ours does, which means every single unit of blood leaving the lungs is doing more work than the equivalent unit in your body. Liter for liter, whale blood is a denser oxygen cargo. Then there is the second multiplier, and it is just as important. Relative to body mass, diving whales simply have more blood. Their total blood volume as a proportion of the body is considerably higher than in land mammals. So they have blood that holds more oxygen, and they have more of it. Those two factors multiply together rather than adding, which is how the numbers get so far away from anything a human can manage. And there is a third element that behaves almost like a hidden reserve tank. The spleen in diving mammals acts as a storage organ for red blood cells. It holds a concentrated supply in reserve, and it can contract and inject that supply into the circulation around the time of a dive. Effectively, the animal tops itself up on demand, adding extra oxygen carrying capacity precisely when it is about to need it, and not wasting the effort of circulating it the rest of the time. Put all of that together, and the blood alone already gives a whale a reserve that has no comparison in our physiology. But blood has a limitation. It has to keep circulating to be useful. Oxygen sitting in the bloodstream has to be pumped to wherever it is required, and pumping costs energy, which is why the largest store is somewhere else entirely, sitting inside the tissue that is going to use it. The molecule in question is called myoglobin. It is a close relative of hemoglobin, built on the same basic chemistry, with the same ability to bind oxygen. But it does not live in the blood. It lives inside muscle cells, and its job is not to transport oxygen anywhere. Its job is to hold oxygen right there in the muscle. Think of it this way. Hemoglobin is the delivery truck. Myoglobin is the warehouse on site at the factory. When the trucks stop running, the factory does not shut down, because it already has weeks of material stacked inside its own walls. A whale's swimming muscles do not have to wait for a delivery, because the oxygen they need is already stored inside them before the dive begins. Now, all mammals have some myoglobin, including you. What separates the deep divers is concentration. In elite diving whales, myoglobin concentration in the swimming muscles reaches levels many times higher than anything found in land mammals. It is not a modest improvement. It is a different regime entirely. And you can see it. Myoglobin is a deeply colored pigment, and at those concentrations, it turns muscle tissue almost black. The dark, nearly purple black meat of deep-diving marine mammals is not an incidental quirk. That color is the oxygen store, made visible. When you look at that tissue, you are literally looking at the reason the animal can stay down. But packing a protein that densely creates a serious problem, and solving it is one of the most elegant pieces of biology in this whole subject. Proteins crammed together at extreme concentration normally begin to stick to one another. They clump, they aggregate, and once they aggregate, they stop working. That is a hard ceiling, and it should have limited how much myoglobin any animal could hold. Diving mammals got around it by changing the surface of the molecule itself. The outer surface of their myoglobin carries an increased positive electrical charge, so the molecules repel each other like magnets turned the same way. They cannot clump because they physically push each other apart. That single modification is what allowed evolution to keep raising the concentration far past the point where it would otherwise have failed. And it appears again and again across unrelated diving lineages, which tells you how central it is. There is a consequence of all this that shows up in behavior. Calves are born with relatively low myoglobin levels, and they build the reserve up gradually as they mature. So young whales are noticeably weaker divers than adults. They cannot go as deep or stay as long, not because they lack technique, but because the reservoir is not full yet. The ability arrives with age. So the load is aboard. The blood is rich, the muscles are saturated. Now the animal has to make it last, and that is a completely separate problem. The moment a whale dives, the body switches into a different operating mode, and the first thing that changes is the heart. Heart rate drops sharply and dramatically. In large divers, it can fall to just a handful of beats per minute, a rate that would be an emergency on land. This does two things simultaneously. A slow heart consumes far less oxygen itself, since the heart is a muscle that has to be fed like any other, and it draws down the circulating reserve more gradually, stretching the same supply across a much longer period. The second change is where the blood goes. Blood vessels in the periphery constrict, essentially closing off large regions of the body from the circulation. Flow is redirected and prioritized toward the brain and the heart, the two organs that cannot tolerate even a brief interruption in oxygen supply without damage. Everything else is placed on rations. And what happens to those ration muscles? They keep working because they have their own private supply. This is exactly why the myoglobin matters so much. The swimming muscles are cut off from the bloodstream and simply run on the oxygen already stored inside them. When that begins to run low, they shift toward working without oxygen altogether, accumulating metabolic waste products as they go. That debt is not settled during the dive. It is paid off at the surface afterwards, which is part of why a whale spends time breathing at the top before going down again. And this is the idea at the heart of the whole subject, the thing worth taking away even if you forget every specific detail. There is no single big resource doing the work here. There is no giant tank. What you have instead is several moderate advantages, coordinated intelligently. Richer blood, more of it, a topped-up reserve from the spleen, saturated muscles, a slowed heart, and ruthless prioritization of the organs that matter most. Remove any one of those, and the dive fails. In complex systems, the winner is rarely the one with the largest single reserve. It is the one that distributes several resources well. Incidentally, you have a weak version of this same reflex. Put your face in cold water, and your heart rate will slow measurably, and blood flow to your extremities will reduce. The machinery is not unique to whales. What is unique is how far it has been tuned. Which brings us to the lungs, and to the part that sounds like a malfunction. As a whale descends, pressure increases enormously, and gas-filled spaces compress. In many deep-diving whales, portions of the lung collapse at depth. Air is squeezed out of the delicate exchange surfaces and forced into the stiffer airways, and the lung stops functioning as a gas exchange organ. That sounds like a disaster. It is a defense. Here is why. Under high pressure, gases from the lungs dissolve into the blood far more readily than they do at the surface. Oxygen gets used. Nitrogen does not. It just accumulates, dissolved in the tissues, doing nothing until the animal ascends. And on a rapid ascent, as the pressure drops, that dissolved nitrogen comes out of solution and forms bubbles inside the body. In human divers, we call this decompression sickness, and it is agonizing and frequently disabling. When the lung collapses at depth, gas exchange stops. Nitrogen can no longer cross into the blood because the surface where that crossing happens is no longer in use. The animal loads far less excess nitrogen precisely because it has temporarily given up on its lungs. And now the exhaling behavior makes sense. For a whale whose oxygen is stored in blood and muscle rather than in air, lung air is not a valuable reserve. It is mostly a liability, a nitrogen source waiting to be pressurized into the bloodstream. Going down with less of it is the smarter trade. One honest caveat, because this is a live area of research. The exact depths and mechanisms differ between species, and whales are not perfectly protected. There is evidence of gas-related tissue damage in animals whose normal dive profile has been disrupted, which is one of the concerns around intense underwater noise. The system is superb, but it depends on the animal being allowed to dive the way it normally would. So let us assemble the whole thing. The muscles are the main store, loaded with myoglobin at concentrations high enough to turn the tissue nearly black, held stable by molecules engineered to repel each other. The blood is the second store, carrying more hemoglobin per unit and present in greater volume, with the spleen injecting an extra reserve of red cells on demand. Then the economy measures take over. The heart slows to a crawl, the periphery is closed down, and blood is reserved for the brain and the heart, while the muscles live off their internal supply and run up an oxygen debt to be repaid at the surface. And the lungs, far from being the tank everyone assumes they are, partially collapse at depth, which is not a failure, but the mechanism that keeps nitrogen out of the blood. If you remember one sentence from this, make it this one. A whale does not dive with full lungs. It dives with full muscles. And the broader point is worth carrying beyond biology. The animal that stays down the longest is not the one with the biggest tank. It is the one that carries several different reserves and manages all of them carefully at once. Which surprised you more, the black oxygen-loaded muscle or the lungs that are better off collapsing? Tell me in the comments. I read. Ladies and gentlemen, right now on your screen there are 3 links. On the left is our newest video. In the center is a square link to our channel, And on the right is a whole playlist of stories just as interesting as this one. Give this video a like, share your opinion in the comments, and then go watch the rest of our videos. Thank you.